Hello everyone. Today we will start our chapter number 2 from your supplementary reader, The Address by Marga Minko. This is a story of a daughter who goes in search of her mother's belonging after the war in Holland. The narrator is the daughter of Mrs. S, who dies during the war. The narrator went to the number 46 Marconi Street to see Mrs. Dolling, who was an old acquaintance of her mother and who had removed almost all the belongings of her mother during the war to this place. All this was done with Mrs. S. silent consent, as Mrs. Dolling wanted to save her things, which they would lose if they had to leave the place. Narrator thought that she probably come into the wrong house. The narrator had seen Mrs. Dolling for the first time during the first half of the war. She had come home for a few days and noticed the change in the rooms. She missed various things. Her mother informed her that Mrs. Dolling had moved these things to the safety and gave her the address 46 Marconi Street. After the war, the narrator visited the address her mother had given her. She remembered Mrs. Dolling clearly. She was woman with a broad back. Mrs. Dolling looked at the narrator searchingly and showed no sign of recognition. She kept staring in silence. She saw that the narrator, who had recognized her mother's green knitted cardigan, was looking at it. She half hid herself behind the door and refused to see her. She was surprised to see the narrator, who had survived from the war. The narrator returned to the station and boarded the train. While in train, she remembered the first time she had seen Mrs. Dolling and how her mother had introduced her to her old acquaintance and given the address. After the first fruitless visit to Mrs. Dolling's house, the narrator visited the place a second time. This time, a girl of about 15 opened the door to her and asked the girl if her mother was at home. Since she was away, the narrator decided to wait for her. She followed the girl along the passage. The first thing that struck her was an old fashioned iron Hanukkah candle holder hung next to the mirror. They then they went into the living room. The narrator was horrified as she was in room she knew and did not know. She found uh, she found herself in the midst of the thing she had so wanted to see again, but which oppressed her in the strange atmosphere. The tasteless way of arrangement, ugly furniture, the muggy smell all contributed to rouse this feeling. She did not have the courage to look around her. She sat down and stared at the woolen tablecloth. As she followed the lines of the pattern, she remembered that it was their tablecloth, which had a burn mark that had never been repaired. Soon she found a hole. The girl poured her tea from the white pot, which had a golden border on the lid. She opened the box and took out some spoons. The narrator praised the box. Mrs. Dolling's daughter said that it was an antique piece. They had got lots more, and she room pointed round the room. The narrator knew very well which thing was she meant. She marked that the cutlery, spoons, fork, and knives uh, was silver. The girl laughed. She walked to the sideboard and wanted to open the drawer. The narrator felt perturbed. The objects linked with her mother aroused memories of her former life. At first, she was eager to see Uh, she was eager to see them, but now they had lost their value since they were served from her mother and were stored in strange surroundings. Moreover, they were useless to her in her present state. She lived in a small rented room with space for no more than a handful of cutlery fitted in the narrow table drawer. She resolved to forget the address. She wanted to leave the memories of her mother and the war behind her and decided to move on. So, this is what the story is. I hope the story is clear to you. Thank you.